What up YouTube, BonzEye here, back with another video. And yeah, today I'm going to be dropping in a bit of hot water. Basically going to give my opinion on this whole debacle about Miles Morales being Miles Morales. So yeah, I recently, as someone who pays attention to like pop culture and stuff in general, I came across this whole story around Peter Parker essentially getting replaced by Miles Morales in the recent Insomniac game. They replaced Spiderman with Peter Parker, and that's caused like a resurfacing of this whole debacle and argument around like Miles Morales and whether he's fit to take on the mantle of Spider-Man for Peter Parker. And yeah, I haven't released videos in quite a while, and yeah, I kind of been looking for something to make a YouTube video on, and I felt like this was as good as any to jump back into, even if it's a bit controversial. But yeah, so here I am. Anyway, so just for a bit of a starting preface before I get into this, I just wanted to kind of ground everything around like this statement from Nerdrotic, who's a YouTuber that I follow, where he basically goes over, makes a statement here that a lot of people are using as the crux of this. So Nerdrotic says Peter Parker is Spider-Man and Miles Morales is Miles Morales. So in general, I'm gonna put this out there. I agree with this statement, and yeah, like, pretty much 90% of the time I agree with this statement. I think it's a fair assessment to make. And I think it makes a lot of sense, right? So I'm going to be speaking of this from my perspective as a Melanesian from Papua New Guinea, who is like a geek and who's been reading comics and loving this. Well, I don't read as much these days anymore, but I used to read comics when I was quite young, growing up. Spider-Man wasn't necessarily one of my personal favorites, but I did like him, and I've grown to appreciate him more over time. I'll just be giving my opinion and my perspective on this whole situation. So this is somewhat of a controversial thing because everybody these days wants to talk about like representation and stuff and wanting to see more people of like different races or whatever on the big screen in video games or comics or whatever, and they want to introduce that stuff. And in general, I'm all for that, right? But I'm personally, like a lot of black people, of the mind that if you're going to be introducing black characters and black people into like these new elements, you should do it, but you should do it more organically, and it shouldn't be at the expense or at the cost of people who, of white people, right? I like white people, right? They've done quite a few bad things over the years, but if they're on the right path now and anything, at the end of the day, we're all still human. Yeah, I like white people. I'm not a racist. A lot of my favorite comic book characters, my actual favorite comic book character of all time, is a white guy, Barry Allen. Right? I love him. He was the first superhero that I personally really resonated with. I like that he was a geek and a nerd, and I was quite the runner when I was in high school. Even to this day, I like to run and stuff, and so I like the superhero whose power was super speed, who was also a geek, and so that's why I kind of resonated with Barry Allen. The only thing that could have made him better for me was that if his color scheme was blue, because that's my favorite color. But other than that, I think he's pretty much, he's a great character. So I love Barry Allen. I've had no problem with, white skin or whatever. I was able to associate with Barry Allen, get into the skin color aside, even though the fact that he was an American person who grew up in America, me here in Papua New Guinea, I resonated with him, I loved him, and full on, he was my hero, right? And in a way, I did like Spider-Man a lot too. Peter Parker, Spider-Man a lot too. I personally don't like characters who are wimpy. So Barry Allen too wasn't necessarily the most physically strong thing, but then he was a fast guy, and so that's why on the physical side I related to him with that. Spider-Man at first, I found him a bit wimpy, but I like the morals and the stuff that Uncle Ben instilled in him. I love that whole thing about Uncle Ben, with the Spider-Man saying, with great power comes great responsibility, from Uncle Ben. That's like the most iconic superhero line that I've ever heard. I think it was built off of something more ancient, but I don't know what the ancient story was. Either way, Stan Lee or whoever wrote it crystallized that ancient wisdom and made that statement, which is like beautiful, it's perfect, it's great. And it's one of the most iconic and most recognizable superhero sayings. The most recognizable, I think, period. And so yeah, you really can't replace that statement and that scenario, the fact that it came from Uncle Ben to Peter Parker, those two people being involved, it's iconic. It's irreplaceable, right? And so this whole idea of replacing Spider-Man with Miles Morales, to me, is problematic, right? Now, I personally liked Miles Morales. The first time I got introduced to him was when I watched the Spider-Verse videos. I didn't get introduced to him. By the time 2011 came around, I'm not sure if I was still reading comics at that time. I think at that time, yeah, like by 2011, I was in grade 10. At the time, comic books, for whatever reason, became difficult to buy anywhere from. So I had sort of stopped reading comic books. So I was never around to see any Miles Morales comic books. They never got here. And if they did, they were like not where I was able to buy them. So I never got into Miles Morales, but I did watch the movie and I liked him. But one thing I noticed is that I found him to be quite derivative. I found him to be very derivative in a sense that, yes, he had like a bit of flavor to him. His personality was different and stuff. But a lot of his things, at least the way he was presented in the Spider-Verse movie, sort of felt like they were coming off of Peter Parker, right? He even had a whole uncle dynamic, right? It was different because the Prowler was evil, right, in this scenario. But there was still like a lot of, it still felt like another version. It still felt like Peter. But you got Peter, changed the spices a little, put him in a slightly different scenario, and made him like, enough of a case that he sort of felt like his own character. And that's why he did wind up I still liked him and resonated with him, because I still felt the core of what I liked with Peter Parker the first time in Miles, and his uncle passing like a nice torch to him. I don't have kids of my own, but I am an uncle. And so, I like that dynamic. Personally, it's one that appeals to me. So yeah, I enjoyed that. So I liked it too when I saw the uncle thing being done again. But again, it was derivative. It felt like they were using Peter again. He didn't really come out old enough. So in my mind, Miles Morales has kind of become like, he's an alternate version of Spider-Man. I like him, but I don't see him as the Spider-Man. And like he I don't see him as someone who has like supplanted or replaced Peter. And I do enjoy him and I would like to see more of him. But as far as I'm concerned, it's always gonna kind of be Spider-Man. So that's kind of where I've been with this in the beginning. But then I watched a video by this YouTuber named Turf Nation. Now he is not a fan of Nerderotic. So for those, I didn't show it, but this is Nerderotic, the guy who made that original statement. Turf Nation, I don't know what it looks like, but I like to watch like videos from different perspectives, so I don't feel like I'm in an echo chamber. And Turf Nation is someone who does not like Nerderotic. Generally speaking, disagrees with most of the. I think he disagrees with most everything Nerderotic says. But he brought up a good point, one that sort of made me go, okay, yeah, a bit. And I don't think I can play it here, but I might show it here.
So why are people saying that Miles Morales isn't Spider-Man, and why are people singling him out compared to other legacy characters? Now before I give my answer to that, I quickly want to explain what legacy characters even are, because it helps with my argument. Essentially, a legacy character is a character whose identity has been passed down to them from an older character in the form of a title, job, or persona for the newer character to assume. Even some characters that not everyone realizes weren't the original, like Barry Allen's Flash. He's definitely the most popular version of the character, but he wasn't the original. Jay Garrick was. Legacy characters are a very important part of comic history. They help bring new life to older stories and superheroes, and sometimes even become more popular than the originals.
I'm assuming that I've played the video, and basically in the video you would have seen that he makes a point about legacy characters. Characters who did come after, picked the mantle of a previous character and carried it on, right? So we have a lot of examples of this. One would be, with the whole Captain America and Falcon thing, right? And that was done recently in the Captain America Falcon thing, where Falcon took over Captain America's shield, he picked the mantle and went on. Oh, I'll get to Flash. He mentioned Flash. I'll get to Flash, but I kind of want to also highlight this. But then, like in this case that it happened, Falcon was an original character, and he assumed the mantle of Captain America. Now, I was very disappointed, and I didn't like that. Because for me, I felt like Falcon was enough of a character on his own that he didn't have to. I never did read any of the Falcon stories growing up, so I can't say for absolute certain like what his stick is, but I know enough about him to know that Falcon 2, he wasn't a derivative character from Steve Rogers, right? he was a character introduced in in Captain America's own comic, and Captain America ended up training him. He had his own thing with like birds and stuff. He liked birds, and then Captain America trained him to fight with birds, and he basically grew up into his own character. And as a person too, the Falcon, I believe, grew up in a home where he had two parents, at least for the early part of his life. Then his father died when he was quite young, and then his mother died later, and then he sort of had to fill on this role. But his parents instilled enough of a good mentality in him that he maintained a wholesome, he didn't resort to crime and stuff, and he became like a volunteer for the community and stuff later on in life. Like, it's kind of an inspiring story. I read a brief synopsis of his story later on, and I came to realize, like, damn, this Falcon guy's got a pretty nice story. So I was kind of disappointed in Captain America and so Falcon and the Winter Soldier when Falcon left his old, like, original identity and had to adopt someone else's identity, when he already kind of had. Because in my mind, Falcon's story placed him as someone who strived to be the best and be patriotic, in spite of the fact that there was some racism and some stuff going on. Like, if anything, that to me, that's a very unique perspective that's independent of like Captain America's influence. And I wish he had kept his mantle of Falcon, continue to be Falcon, maybe adapt the shield, but like, oh, now maybe not. But either way, he could still be Falcon. He could still be like someone who represents America, but he'd still be his own identity, whilst also representing. Like, maybe just change his outfit to, you know, have the stripes and the stuff, but he's still Falcon, right? He spiritually fulfills the role that Captain America did, and he has enough of a personality clash. Like, people often argue whether it should have been Bucky to pick up the Captain America shield or Falcon. But then, like, Bucky always felt like sort of like, you know, he killed people and stuff. Like, he's kind of tainted, right? You know what I mean? Whereas Falcon was always like a patriotic person. Like, if anybody was going to fulfill the role of Captain America, it would be someone who sort of filled the same role. And Bucky and Falcon could like continue to work together and do their own thing. So I was kind of disappointed by that turn of events in that movie. And even going back to Flash himself, the original Flash was Jay Garrick. And then Jay Garrick wound up being replaced by Flash. Now, this is a very different situation from the one I just gave. So in the one I just gave, you had someone who was his own character, came up, but then he came over and replaced the original. And I don't like how that was done, because I still think Falcon could have remained himself. Now in this one, you have an example of someone actually straight up stealing it, but somehow I'm still okay with the situation, because I am okay. Barry Allen is the version of the Flash I know. He's the version of the Flash I first read, fell in love with, grew up with, and I love this version of Flash. I didn't know about the original until later on. But then, one of the things that I feel like Turf was missing in his video was he missed the context by which Barry Allen had to come in and take the mantle from Jay Garrick. So if you look at like the history of comic books, we had the first up the golden age of comic books, which started like during like World War II times. I think it will say somewhere here. I mean, yeah, long story short, you can look at this article, pause it and read on your own. But long story short, as this article will show, you had World War II happen. You know, it was like a hard time for people. Comic books were very cheap, and they were filled with patriotic stories about heroic people doing heroic things, which inspired people. And so that's why they became very popular during the war, and they sold a lot during the war. And then eventually, when World War II ended, the popularity of the genre just sort of lost steam. And in general, you had all of these popular comics go down in sale, and then some of them even got cancelled. And Jay Garrick's version of The Flash was an example of one that wound up getting cancelled. He lasted until he was cancelled here. So he was cancelled. And then, like, you know, there was like a big gap, and then later on, after about 5 years, I think, they reinvented the character of Flash and replaced him with Barry Allen. And I'm not, because I don't read Jay Garrick, I can't say how similar they were. And so I can't tell you whether or not Barry was like derivative of Jay Garrick. But there's a reason Barry came in. They felt like it had to be a new character, but they kind of wanted to bring in some of the old audience, so they gave him the same name, and then they built him up. And now Barry has had so many years of him being the main version of the Flash. In this current modern times, when people think of Flash, they don't think of Jay Garrick, they think of Barry Allen. And so that was like done in the freaking 1956. That was years ago. He's had decades to be Flash, and he's like well established, well accepted. Now, when you look at Miles, he's only been around, like I said, since 2011, and that's 12 years, but that's baby years. In terms of comic book years, Miles is like, maybe not an infant, but like he's like a toddler, right? He's barely starting to learn to walk on his own right now. And I really don't see Miles as being someone who can compete with Flash. Now, another thing that I want to mention is that if you look at the whole replacement between Barry Allen and Jay Garrick, there was a reason Barry Allen had to come in and replace and like be new and breathe life into the whole story. It was because Jay Garrick and in general, like comics in general at the time, just became unpopular, right? The whole genre in general, the Golden Age, just became unpopular in general. So they had to change things, to reinvent the wheel, to bring in new customers. But then at the same time, they wanted to like have some nostalgia, and so they used the same like superhero name and so on. So that's like a unique scenario that resulted in them needing to do what they did. Yeah, sorry, battery died there. But yeah, anyway, so that was a unique, and again I repeat, a unique situation that required that they had to replace Jay Garrick with Barry Allen, right? That's not something that they just did and then people just accepted it. Jay Garrick was gone for about 5 years, and then they had to have him replaced with Flash, and it was at a point where these comics were unpopular, so they had to reinvent it in some way, and so that's why they did what they did. However, this is quite different when you look at the case of Miles Morales and Peter Parker, because Peter Parker is still beloved. A lot of people still really love Peter Parker being Spider-Man, and I'm one of those people too. I think of that saying, with great power comes great responsibility. That's an iconic saying, and I associate Uncle Ben and Peter with that statement, right? There's like emotional connection there, and it's to Peter Parker, who's a white guy. Skin color got nothing to do with it. So if you replace Spider-Man with, if you replace Peter Parker with Miles, it's gonna suck. I'm not happy with it. Miles is kind of his own thing, but you can't take that away from Peter. Like, there's not really a way that it can happen unless it's like over like several decades. First, so the only way it could happen really is if people genuinely despise Peter Parker, grow to despise Peter Parker, that character, for some reason, or maybe not despise, but become apathetic, right? Like they just stop caring. And when people stop caring, then you can do it, right? People didn't care about Jay, so they could replace him. But I mean, I could look it up right now. Spider-Man 3 film, box office, right? Box office. Yeah, look at that. Almost 2 billion, right? Like, that's like a huge amount of money. So you can't deny that Peter Parker Spider-Man is still popular. So replacing him is going to piss off a lot of fans, right? And I understand, because I'm a fan of him. Maybe not the biggest fan, right? But I definitely love Peter Parker. And it's got nothing to do with skin color. It's the person that I really like. I like the story, the arc, There's some things about him I don't like, but, overall, I think he's a good person, a very inspirational person. And you try to replace someone like that, you're going to get backlash. It's just natural, normal. And so, okay, I'll admit, maybe there are some racists out there who don't like the idea of it. Yeah, those people exist, whatever. But I don't think it's the majority of people. I really don't. I fundamentally don't. And I know other people who are comic books fans, maybe not like neighbors here, but like friends like from school and stuff who are also kind of nerdy, who would be upset with like this whole replacing known characters with other characters. Yeah, like if it I'd feel the same way if it was like an original black character that was like, for example, I don't like it when the Falcon gave up his identity, right? I didn't like that he got a white, it's not a white color, like blue red, but like, he replaced his identity with another identity, right? I felt like he had his own thing and then he gave up his identity that was his and adopted somebody else's. Like, I also don't like it from the black person's point of view either. I'd rather he have his own name, his own thing, but he can still fulfill the same spiritual role as the other guy did, right? Like, if that guy dies, and in a way it is him taking up the mantle, but he doesn't have to take up the name, right? Like, yeah, it's a complicated story. a complicated story, a complicated topic, right? I think that's how I'll summarize and put my perspective is. I want original characters. I don't want them to be derivative of the character they're replacing, right? Like, because I do find Miles Morales to be derivative of Peter Parker. I want them to be original, have their own original story, have their own identity, and if for whatever case you kill off one character and want to have another character take their role, don't have that be at the expense of their own identity. Is what I'm saying. Right? Like if you had someone who was the leader of the Star Trek Enterprise, right, and have him replaced with a black guy, don't just make that black guy, Kirk but black. Have him be his own character with his own identity, but even his own leadership style, but have it work for the situation that they're in, right? So, Falcon taking over. If Miles Morales had his own superhero name that wasn't Spider-Man, and then Spider-Man dies and then he comes in and becomes the defender of New York, but he's like a different spider-related name, that to me would be, I'd prefer that. But that's just my opinion on the matter, I guess. Obviously, people can have different opinions otherwise, but I feel like, just overt racism calling is maybe a bit too much. And I think that it's not nice to be ignorant of the fact that it's not just about race, right? Sometimes it's like the character that you like. That's not to do with the skin color, it's just personality, it's core that people like. So replacing that is going to get you back. I'm sorry. Alright, I'm going to end there. I feel like I'm rambling on too much now. That's the end of this video. Thank you very much for watching. I will do more videos related to movies and comics and stuff in the future, but I also do other content on AI stuff. And I also like to talk about my own culture here in Hopping Room, so if any of that seems interesting to you, feel free to subscribe to the video, and if you like the video, don't forget to like it, and comment down below, I guess dislike if you dislike, but if you have some strong statements that you'd like to make, feel free to comment down below about whether you agree or disagree with me. With that, I'm going to end this video. Thank you very much for watching. This is BonzEye, signing out. Catch you all later.